Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Now Titania's deep dive is out there and she certainly is an interesting champion that could kind of go either way. There are some very crazy and good things, but also a couple of things that make me think she's going to be quite synergy reliant, which, well, typically in my book is fairly big negative on a champion. And also ultimately something that we can't be extremely certain of, because it will entirely depend, I suppose, on players' ingenuity and timing. But there's definitely quite a lot to take a look at, because she does have a potential to be a very useful champion if she translates well. But I'll also go over my points of worry. Now, first things first, she does have access, fairly frequent in fact, to unblockable, unstoppable, and indestructible, which makes me think she's going to be extremely fun champion to play with, where you can just kind of go ham on the opponent, which also seemingly will give you ability to likely tank special threes, which could be quite important because she does seem like a bit of a tempo character. As you can see, she will have access to passive furies, and quite a lot of them. They're not the most potent furies, they're 10%, but she can stack them up quite high. And also, she is going to be completely immune to buffs, which is very powerful. And I'm kind of glad that we're getting more champions that are going to be completely buff immune, because up until now we only had Red Guardian and Spider-Man 2099. Then we got Quicksilver, who's not buff immune, but doesn't gain the dexterity buff, therefore effectively can turn into a buff immune champion in specific matchups for purposes of EMP modification and some other nodes. Then we have Ant-Man buff. Now we have Titania. So effectively we went from being 2 champions who don't gain buffs, having 5 champions who, well, 4 champions who are buff immune and 1 champion who doesn't really gain buffs, even dexterity buff. So that's quite a big increase in that department, and obviously that is a great way how to counter quite a ton of mystic champions, which is again yet shaping this game in my opinion. Right. So her unblockable, unstoppable, indestructible mechanic is called Haymakers, which is quite funny in my opinion as well. And she does have a potential to inflict a crap ton of debuffs. Now the problem is that almost none of useful debuffs is easily accessible. And those useful debuffs that we see there, like Petrify, like Falter, like Deaccelerate, they're not overly potent. They are at 30% potency. But we'll get to it in a bit when we're going to discuss some things that I want to be cautious of when we're talking about Titania. So as we can see, she's completely buff immune, and also she has slight increase in physical resistance. It's not the biggest physical resistance increase at all. I genuinely not sure why they couldn't just add it in her base stats, but had to be additional ability. Also, her Haymakers. Performing a dash, a second medium attack, or charging a heavy attack grants Titania unblockable, unstoppable, and indestructible passive for 4 seconds, and then it goes on 30-second cooldown. Now that's quite important, because this is going to be something that we have to consistently kind of bait out every 30 seconds. And there's another ability where she can inflict her debuffs through block, where it will mean that ideally you do want to parry the medium hits anyways. So the typical start against Titania, I suppose, would be if you can't get in your immediate parry, then you need to dash away, have her dash in at you, and kind of like dance around for 4 seconds, and only then you can start fighting properly. So it could be a quite good mechanic in the sense of wasting time. So we'll see how. I don't think she's going to be potent defender. I do think she's going, but however, there is the potential to catch people off guard, especially initially. But overall, I don't necessarily see her as the most annoying defender. It's just this one mechanic that we're going to kind of have to learn to get around to. Also, while these effects are active, each hit deals a burst of 163 physical damage for each debuff on the opponent, so there's going to be additional nice source of damage as well. So as we can see in this image, she can place quite a lot of weaknesses, suppressions, and every time she places any personal debuff, she gains that 10% fury for, I believe, 10 or 15 seconds. So she can stack up quite high of these, especially with a couple of synergies. Every single time she hits opponent with a light attack, she inflicts suppression debuff, and she also does it through block. It's a weak suppression, but every time she basically hits opponent with a light attack, she gains a fury. And then she does have access to staggers, which is one of the bigger pieces of utility that she can access to, aside from this whole haymaker mechanic of unstoppable, unblockable, and so on and so forth. And when she is inflicting her personal debuffs on the opponent, she's also reducing the duration of her haymakers. So that is not going to matter too much when you fight against Titania again, because the idea is that you don't get consistently clobbered. But when you are using Titania offensively, you will be able to trigger that unstoppable, unblockable, and indestructible more frequent than every 30 seconds, just so you know, even without synergies. But there's one synergy that will really help with that. And yeah, so the main debuff basically she inflicts is suppression on her basic attacks. Then all her special 1s and special 2s, basically every hit is also inflicting weakness. And then each of special attacks have a separate debuff on the last hit that they do. On level 1, you inflict Debilitate, which increases the debuff duration by 50% on all of your debuffs, which means you're just going to be able to stack more of your debuffs more frequently because all of them are going to last longer. And Special 2 inflicts Energy Vulnerability that you can refresh basically by dropping 4 light hits in opponent in succession, and you can keep refreshing it for the rest of the fight. I do not know whether the physical vulnerability stacks. That might make the biggest difference for her damage. If you can keep stacking physical vulnerability, she might turn out to be a ramp-up character with a very high damage ceiling. If it's not stackable, it could be quite a big problem that we're going to talk about a bit later. Again, staggers obviously is going to give her several bits of utility. Again, suppression, they're quite weak. I don't think it's going to matter too much. Weaknesses, again, it's nice to have access to weakness, obviously. Makes her even tankier, but it's not like it gives you that much additional utility. Neither does physical vulnerability or necessarily debilitate. Only kind of utility aspect so far that we see from Titania, from her heavy attack basic combos, level 1, level 2, and everything else, is what we saw at the start, plus the stagger. So, immune to buffs, that's quite a big deal. And then we have the access to unblockable, unstoppable, and indestructible for seconds periodically, which can be a potentially very big deal. Because you can do quite a lot with that. You can purposely tank special attacks, for instance. You can get guaranteed intercepts. You can block break and get guaranteed openings even if opponent's blocking. Or you can time it well to tank several different effects. So I do think pretty much make or break aspect of Titania's utility is how well people will learn to utilize the Haymaker passive buffs that she gets. Other than that, unfortunately, the rest of the kit is kind of like a filler for damage stacking and fury gaining and damage increase, which I am not the biggest fan of, especially considering some numbers that we're going to be taking a look at later. Here we can see all of the things that I mentioned before, how she can keep stacking on more and more furies. It's nice, you can reach 20 furies, I assume fairly straightforward. But at the same time, pay attention to the numbers on the screen. And I always say, do not judge, do not make any final conclusions about champions based on numbers and deep dive. And that is 100% the same case right now. I am not making final conclusions about the champion based on the numbers that I do see in deep dive. But quite a lot of them do have me worried. They do. So we can see 5-star level 3, all those debuffs active, 10 furies, 13k. All of the debuffs after level 3 are very good, but useful. We have 30% Wither, 30% Petrify, 30% Cowardice, 30% Falter, 30% Deaccelerate. 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 30 But there's no way to keep refreshing these. There's no way how to have an entire fight active with these. And in my opinion, they are a bit more of a gimmick in a sense. It was a certain shock factor to see them, but you're not going to use any of these abilities really, I think, to rely on their utility. Maybe with the exception of Intimidate, which is making opponent more passive, which is going to basically enable you to kind of dash in straight after your level 3 and hit them pretty much guaranteed. But you can't rely on the falter that opponents are going to miss because it's 30%. You can't rely on Disorients reducing the defensive ability accuracy because it's 30%. You can't rely on Deaccelerate because it's not slow and it's only 30%, so it's not guaranteed. And so on and so forth. So I still do have my worries about Titania. Let's take a look at her signature ability. Whenever Titania inflicts a stackable personal debuff, she has up to 30% chance to inflict it another time. That's nice. Why not? And when fighting large next large champions, Fury potency is increased by 30%. Again, so the Fury goes from 10% Fury to 13% Fury, which, you know, is a bonus, but take for what you will. Here we are with rank 4 Titania. 15 Furies, what, 2,700 hit, 4,500, and some of these are also special attack hits and stuff. 3,900. Here we have a ton of debuffs, 22 Furies, and 44 Furies, and that's like an 8,000 something. 58 Furies. And these were heavy attack hits. And I think these were the two biggest hits that I saw. It was 29k and 30k. But keep in mind that this is after a meaningful, significant ramp up of, you know, your level 2 and level 3. And I just don't quite know. I'm not sold. Again, do not make any final conclusions about champion's damage output based on a deep dive. I've made that mistake before, and at times they were outrageously misleading. At the same time, though, having 60 Furies active, seemingly pretty much a perfect situation with, you know, as many debuffs as you're ever gonna get an opponent, and all that good stuff. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether she's not going to feel somewhat underwhelming. I hope she doesn't. I truly hope. But we'll see about that. Now let's move on to Synergies. And here are the two things which I think would completely kind of change the game for Titania, and I think would be required to get out those amazing, crazy good numbers and situations. But as we know, in this game, in most meaningful and competitive content, you just can't run synergy teams, or very rarely you get the opportunity to. When we're talking Alliance Quest, Alliance Wars, Battlegrounds, and Eternity of Pain type events, and so on and so forth, or clearing Abyss and things, you just can't afford to have synergy team. But let's go over nonetheless. So this is one of the two most important synergies, which I'm going to revisit at the end as well. So with She-Hulk, start each fight with 10 Fury passives, which means basically 100% attack increase at the start of the fight, plus increase 25% duration, which means you're going to be able to stack more of your Furies, and more of them are going to be active at any given time, which definitely is going to result in quite significant damage increase, especially early on in the fight. For She-Hulk, it's nice. Your heavy attacks deal burst damage. Can work out quite nice, I think. It can definitely give She-Hulk extra spunk there, for sure. This one, I think, is kind of bad. Synergy members increase the potency of Fury effects by 4% for each Synergy member present, max 20%. Again, we have synergies that kind of do that, I think, similar anyways. Yeah, I just don't think it's the biggest deal, especially if you would have to dedicate the entire team to that. I don't think this is particularly great synergy. So, horrible bosses, debuffs gain plus 50% ability accuracy for each other Synergy member present, increased to plus 100% for each defeated Synergy member. Does not affect debuffs from Titania's signature ability. However, this is quite cool because you can battle through concussions, reduced ability accuracies, and stuff like that. So I do think this synergy does have a place and time. It's not a synergy you need every day, all day, but it definitely can be useful at times situationally. Moving on, Synergyman. This synergy special attacks don't generate power for the opponent if Titania is alive and gain plus 10% attack rating if Captain Marvel is alive, 750 critical rating if Storm is alive, and 400% critical damage rating if Yondu is alive. So I think this is kind of neat. I think most likely you'd ever end up running this with Storm. So increased critical rating is, by the looks of it, exactly what Titania needs, because she didn't appear to be critting a whole lot in the deep dive. And then obviously don't generate power can be useful in order to enable you to be more aggressive as well. So I think this one's quite decent, especially with the Storm, because Storm is the best champion to bring along anyways, and increasing critical rating would be quite useful. This energy genuinely made me laugh out loud quite a bit because of Ghost gain 300 armor rating. They felt the need to include a Ghost in Synergy, but they didn't want to give Ghost a smidge of benefit. This is what it is. I just kind of found it funny that somebody really wanted Ghost to be a part of this synergy, but wanted to make sure that Ghost gets nothing. It's like, okay, the other aspects of, are neat. Titania gets 20% more power from heavy attacks. It's not bad. Black Cat, can pause her cruelty passives for 7 seconds when Hunt ends. It's not the best, it's not the worst. But Ghost gets nothing. They could have literally just said 1 armor rating and it would effectively be the same thing. The same idea, It's like, okay, I want Titania to have synergy with Ghost, but Ghost gets nothing. F all. And this is the last important synergy. So for the Champion's Greatest Fighters now includes every champion. So I do think this actually can be beneficial for the champion. So I do think Swede is celebrating this synergy like nobody else, because you do get quite significant benefits using the champion against Conte's Greatest Fighters, and I'm sure Swede is super happy. For the rest of the 99.999% of the player base, I don't think anybody cares. Now, Titania. Intercepting the opponent causes Titania's Fury passives, pauses Titania's Fury passives for 2 seconds. So that's a way to pause her passives and keep increasing the amount of Fury passives you can stack up. Additionally, it reduces Haymaker's cooldown by 5 seconds. It's funny because the deep dive said 10 seconds. They said 10 seconds with the voice clip, but the screenshot comes out as 5. Well, either way, reducing this cooldown obviously will enable you to access your unstoppable, unblockable, and indestructible much more frequently. Remember, you're also reducing cooldown, inflicting personal debuffs, therefore, by using your special attacks, I think, and regular combos. So I think if you combine She-Hulk synergy, increasing the duration of the Furies, with Champion synergy, enabling you to pause these Furies and get your cooldown, that will give you access to your Haymaker abilities much more frequently, which means you will be able to dash in and out without any worry while those are active, because you're unstoppable and indestructible and unblockable and will always find an opening, which means you will be able to be much more aggressive, continuously placing more debuffs, building power quicker, and push the tempo of the fight. I do think that with the Champion synergy, with She-Hulk synergy, she could be kind of like balls to the wall type of champion that has quite a bit of utility hidden in that indestructible, unblockable, unstoppable primarily. Without it, I still unfortunately think that make or break of this character quite literally falls on the unblockable, unstoppable, and indestructible ability, the Haymakers. Because realistically, for a Science Champion, She doesn't have any meaningful access to, I don't know, power stings, towns, petrifies, or any of the useful debuffs. The only useful debuff that she gets to have access to is the stagger. And that kind of defines the science class, typically. You can either have access to some damage or time effects that have some additional abilities, like in terms of Stealth Suit Spidey, or some other champions. But here, you don't really have that. Like, quite literally, make or break of this character right now entirely depends on how well we will be able to learn to utilize that unstoppable and how well it's going to be integrated in the game. And then, you know, stagger. But it's not like that stagger is doing absolute wonders for like Agent Venom or something in science class. So we'll see. I do think there definitely is potential. Because buff immunity, unstoppable, and unblockable, indestructible. All of those are powerful abilities. I do kind of feel that it's a bit of a letdown for the rest of her abilities to be extremely unimpressive suppression debuff, slightly reducing opponent's combat power rate, extremely, you know, weakness, which just kind of reduces the amount of damage that you take back. And there's none of the cool, useful, shiny debuffs that actually mainly provide utility to science champions until you get to level 3. And even the level 3 debuffs, you know, they're not reliable. So there are definitely my doubts, again, as something that I also want to keep in mind alongside the damage numbers. Because again, 16 Furies and there's like 4k crit. What the fuck is that? But again, I do not ever anymore make kind of like final conclusions about the champion based on the damage output. So this one's tricky. Could work out very well, or could work out quite underwhelming. I guess time will tell. Let me know what you guys think, how strong Titania is going to be. See you guys soon. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the next month.